There are a few single seats around. If you're sitting next to an empty seat, you could raise your hand. That would be helpful. So there's the friendly people that are saying there's a seat available if you'd like to get off the floor or get off the wall and come find a seat. It's like a Celtics-Lakers game or something in here. We're packed house. We'll get started in about a minute or two here.
So, good evening. Thanks for coming, y'all. My name is Todd Butler. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty in the College of Arts and Sciences, and it is my genuine honor to introduce our speaker, the award, and I'll also add a few kind of logistical announcements. So let me speak first on the award. Washington State University created the William Julius Wilson Award for the Advancement of Social Justice in 2009 to honor individuals who promote social inclusiveness and diversity in social policies and who strive to reduce joblessness. The award is named after William Julius Wilson, who received his PhD in sociology from WSU in 1966. A prior MacArthur Fellow, those are the so-called Genius Grants, and currently the Lewis P. and Linda L. Geiser University Professor at Harvard, Professor Wilson is widely considered one of the nation's most influential sociologists. And can I get a go Cougs for that? There we go. Now it's a legitimate function. So after the presentation of this year's award, Dr. Robert Bullard will give a talk entitled The Quest for Environmental, Climate, Racial, and Economic Justice in the United States. And then there will be a moderated time for question and answers. We're also pleased to include this event in WSU's Common Reading agenda. Those attending as part of the Common Reading event may see Karen Weatherman at the conclusion of the Q&A in the lobby just outside this room, so right out where you came in. So, preparing to introduce Dr. Robert Bullard, tonight's William Julius Wilson Award recipient, I found myself in a position not unlike that of, if certain members of the audience will forgive me, a new university administrator talking about strategic planning. That is, what does one say that hasn't already been said before? Now, to be sure, part of my role is to say things that have been said before, not only because they were said at other occasions and other venues that we have not yet shared, but also because Dr. Bullard's accomplishments deserve our repeated recognition. Widely lauded as the father of environmental justice and a leading voice against environmental racism, Dr. Bullard is the author or editor of 18 books, several of which have become standard texts in the field. His work exemplifies an approach that we at WSU might best understand as part of our land-grant mission, to create knowledge that extends beyond the academy and into the wider public, bringing our intellects, our attention, and our passion into conversation with communities that have otherwise been too often disregarded, if not actively discriminated against. As the title of his co-authored book, 2012, succinctly declares, and it's at the center of the little slide here, some communities have the wrong complexion for protection. His list of external accolades is thus similarly long and includes being named one of 13 environmental leaders of the century by Newsweek, one of 22 climate trailblazers by the Global Climate Action Summit, and one of the world's 100 most influential people in climate policy by Apolitical. In 2013, he was honored with the Sierra Club John Muir Award, the first African American to win the award. In 2014, 1 year later, the Sierra Club named its new Environmental Justice Award after Dr. Bullard. Here, we at WSU might be put on collective notice, for Dr. Bullard does not just receive awards, he helps change the institutions that recognize him. It is in this latter regard that I might, at my conclusion, say something new or at least less remarked upon about Dr. Robert Bullard. As I was gathering information for this introduction, I stumbled across this picture on the website of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, which along with the HBCU, that's Historically Black Colleges and Universities, Climate Change Consortium, which Dr. Bullard co-founded, and Texas Southern University, where Dr. Bullard serves as Distinguished Professor of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy, is planning the 7th annual HBCU Climate Change Conference in November. Now, if I'm right in this picture, and he confirmed it just a few minutes ago, Dr. Bullard is seated here in the first row, and that's him right there. That's him. Let me see if I can. Right there. He's seated here in a crowd of various ages, races, and genders. And here I'm just going to go off script to say, in an era where we see and are confronted with so much negative news about the climate, about our possibilities, when we have to confront this, and we can't look away from this, we also have to see this. We also have to see more than just a photograph of a book cover or an award. It's this photo that we have to look at. It is a photograph that represents not an individual, but the collective power of communities. One in which we are reminded not only of the challenge, but of the joy, the passion, and the enthusiastic endurance that must accompany struggle. It is a photo, not just of a leader, but of a legacy. For this accomplishment, as well as so many others, we are honored tonight to present the 2019 William Julius Wilson Award for the Advancement of Justice to Dr. Robert Bullard.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Down, it's heavy. That's it. Come on back up. I'm done.
That was it?
I'm done. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction. That photograph that you saw was a culmination of hard work trying to get young people resources to work on climate and sustainability and resilience. And we were finally able to get resources to work on these issues and help develop, train, educate the next generation of climate leaders. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, been a busy day. And I want to just thank those who have organized this lecture and this award ceremony, and to give honor to Dr. Wilson for his work over these many years, and to his alma mater. I am a sociologist by training. I'm an environmental sociologist. Even though I am housed in an urban planning program, urban planning and environmental policy, I will always be an environmentalist. The subject of my talk is the quest for environmental, climate, racial, and economic justice in the U.S. My job, sociologists are good about connecting dots. We bring it all together. And before policymakers, particularly around environment and climate and other issues, before sociologists were brought into the conversation, things were not connected. They were so disjointed and disconnected. You bring a sociologist in the room, we can make sense of chaos, so they say. So I like to write. And for some reason, I like to see my name in print. You know, I've written 18 books that cover a range of areas: housing, transportation, energy, sustainability, smart growth, urban sprawl, disaster response. It's 18 books, but it's just one book, but don't tell anybody. The central glue or theme that runs through all of those volumes, it can be summarized in fairness, equity, and justice. Well, I'm dealing with housing or transportation or energy or food or whatever. And so bringing those pieces together, the word for today is intersectionality. How things are connected and interconnected. So just remember that word for today, intersectionality. I've been doing this work a long time, and which means that I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of change, and I've seen some things that have not changed. And what the environmental justice movement has done over the last 40 years is to redefine what environment is and what environmentalism is. For a long time, the environment was considered something out there, hinterlands, wildlands, away from. And for decades, and maybe a century, there is a missing piece. The environment is also inside the house, the home, the neighborhood, the city, the metro area, or whatever connection. And so we as environmental justice folks who do this work, redefine what the environment is. The environment is everything. It's where we live, work, play, learn, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. That doesn't leave a whole lot out. So when we talk about this whole question of what is environmental justice, somebody asked me that, and they said, what is environmental justice? I just give them a textbook definition. It's not environment. How can you talk about environment and justice? Environment is neutral. Environment is Everybody is affected the same way. So how can you talk about justice and environment? Environmental justice embraces the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of environmental, energy, health, employment, education, housing, transportation, and civil rights laws. So we're talking, when we talk about the part that was left out of environmentalism for a long time, the justice part, or how policies and regulations and standards differentially and adversely impact or differentially advantage. So when we talk about these equity issues, I want you to understand that no matter what discipline you're in, whether it's journalism or whether it's hydrology or whether it's sociology, epidemiology, and all these other ologies, doesn't matter. There is a role that you can play in addressing the issue of environmental justice or environmental injustice or inequity. If we talk about spatial inequality, all spaces and all places are not created equal. If we talk about space, location, and how where you live can provide advantages for you, access to the things that make you healthy, access to a good school, playground, parks, walk trail, access to a good food source, whether it's a grocery store, supermarket, farmer's market, etc. So space and place makes a lot of difference. I wrote a book, this is a Sierra Club book, on equal protection, environmental justice, and communities of color. Sierra Club, any Sierra Club members? When they gave me the John Muir Award, that award comes with lifetime membership. I had no, well, I won't say this because it's being, I think, sent out. I wasn't going to say, I had no intention of joining the Sierra Club, but I have a lifetime member because I won the John Muir Award. I worked with Sierra Club for many years, and I worked with a lot of organizations, mainstream green groups, and you can work with groups without joining them in terms of membership. But, Sierra Club, they really do great books, but I said to Sierra Club, I said, Sierra Club need to do a book about struggle, about justice, people, justice for people. I mean, it's been fighting justice for animals, whales, and ducks, and nature, etc., which is very important. Very important. But there's a missing piece in terms of justice for communities. And so I got them to do this book, on equal protection, environmental justice, and communities of color. And the fact that if a community happens to be poor, working class, or inhabited largely by people of color, it generally gets less protection. I didn't make that up. But it is what it is, as they say. It is what it is. That's what happens in reality. And historically, there's a direct correlation between exploitation of land and exploitation of people. You look at the most exploited places around the globe when it comes to extraction, you'll find that the most polluted places also have the most exploited people. And when you look at the people connection with the land, you're talking about double exploitation. The foundation of environmental justice research and policy, 1979 was a critical year for me. I graduated from Iowa State University, a state university, also a land-grant university, like WSU. And my wife and I, we moved to Texas. My wife was from Michigan. She had never been south. So she accused me of dragging her to Texas. Kicking and screaming. I did. I did not like Michigan. It was too cold. We stayed in Grand Rapids 1 year, and I said, it's time to pack it and head back south. We moved to Houston, and I got a job at Texas Southern University in Houston, the university where I am now. And one day, my wife's a lawyer. She came home and said, Bob, I have just, I took a case from this community in Northeast Houston, and I have just sued this company. And I won't call any name, but the initials will be BFI. And I sued the state of Texas Department of Health. And I said, you did what? I said, I work for the state. State University. She said, yeah. And I said, okay, what did you sue them for? She said, this company is trying to put a sanitary landfill, and we all know there is nothing sanitary about a landfill. That's where the garbage goes. It doesn't go to garbage heaven, it goes to a landfill. Putting this landfill in the middle of this predominantly black, middle-class suburban community. When I say predominantly black, that's like me saying my family is predominantly black. This is an all black, 85% of the residents in that neighborhood were black. 83% were middle class. 85% were homeowners. It was not a ghetto. It was not a poverty pocket. This was a black, middle-class, suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas. Hear me. Houston is the only major city in the U.S., fourth largest city in the country, and it does not have zoning, which means it has what's called unrestrained capitalism, which means if you have the money, you can put anything, anywhere, anytime. And that's what's happened. They put this, the idea was this company wanted to put this landfill in this community. And they came to my wife and she said, I'll take the case. And she came home and said, I just filed this lawsuit and I need somebody who can assist and help me find out where all the landfills and incinerators and garbage dumps are in Houston from the beginning up until 1978. Now, this is old. This is before most of you were born. I know this. So if you're a historian, you can appreciate this. But it's not long ago. It's not that long ago. In 1979, this is 40 years ago, this year, the 4th anniversary. The case was Bean versus Southwest Waste Management Corporation. It's a landmark case. The first lawsuit filed fighting environmental discrimination or environmental racism using civil rights law. In this case, the legal theory was that this company was placing this landfill in this community, and the city, the county, and the state were allowing it to happen because this community, the race of the community. So they were charging racial discrimination, just like employment discrimination, housing discrimination, voting discrimination, etc. So it was a novel case, Bean case. And the idea was the Bean case. And so I said, you need somebody to map and put it on, find out where they all are and use census data. I said, you need a sociologist to do that. She said, that's what you are, right? I said, yeah, but she said, then you have to do it. Now, I had one environmental class at Iowa State, one. None of it that one class dealt with none of this stuff that I'm talking about now. And I said, do you know how much work that is involved? She had filed a temporary restraining order, and she needed something to support, to take into court in 2 weeks. I said, if that's what you need, I guess that's what you need. And I had 10 students in my research methods class. Hey. And we took on a project. There was no studies, there were no methodology, there was nothing. So we designed the study, and we went and collected the data and archival data and old records, and through the city's department and the state, and we gathered the information, and we just went about a sociologist as detective, piecing together this puzzle, putting everything together. I did the study and I wrote it. I did a study in 1979 and gave it to her and mapped it out on base maps and color coded. This is before laptops and iPads and GIS. I ran the data on punch cards. It was like ancient. It's like a hammer and a chisel. But what we found, the fact is research is research. Before phones, cell phones, and before Google, this was your Google. Your mind, your brain, your creativity was your Google. And in doing the research, we were able to sort out and map. And I would tell my students when I gave them the addresses for where these landfills were, I told them, I said, okay, student, We know Houston is flat and partially below sea level. Anytime you see a mountain, landfill, you verify that address, check off. And I said, anytime we can't find out where there's open space grown up and we don't know what it was, we will do an ethnographic, methodology where you talk to people around the neighborhood and verify what was there. We were able to document 5 out of 5 of the Houston-owned landfills located in black neighborhoods. 5 out of 5. 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills were in black neighborhoods. And 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators were in black neighborhoods. 82% of all the waste dumped in Houston during that period of time, from the 30s up until 1978, were in black neighborhoods. Even though blacks only made up 25% of the population. Now, I've traveled all across this country. I've been to every state in this country, lots of cities, places. I have never seen poor communities or communities of color get 82% of the good stuff. More than their fair share. It ain't happening. So, there were demonstrations being held. The name of the landfill, get this, Whispering Pines. Oh, sounds like a subdivision. I'd love to live in Whispering Pines. Where do you live? I live in Whispering Pines subdivision. No, it's a landfill. The guy with his back turned, he was a young justice of the peace in Houston. Now, he's my congressman, Al Green, not the singer, Congressman Al Green. So in front of this landfill was, I could go on and on, but not. This landfill was 1,300 feet from a school. 1,300 feet. I could throw a baseball 1,300 feet. That's like across the road. And there were at least 6 elementary schools within a half-mile radius. This is disrespect. This is disrespect. And so there was no movement in 1978, in 79 when we were doing this landfill. 1982, when the birth of a movement in Warren County, North Carolina, over the siting of a hazardous waste landfill, where this company from New York came down to Raleigh and bought some oil, and the oil was contaminated with PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. Nasty stuff, not something you want to sprinkle on your cereal, nasty. And they needed a place to dump this oil, and they went through this rigorous process through the state. And then they found, and the winner is Warren County. Warren County is one of the poorest counties in the state, located in the Black Belt, predominantly black county. It sparked demonstrations. Kids stayed out of school, 500 people arrested. This is Reverend Benjamin Chavis leading the charge. Young people, elementary school kids, staying out of school, marching, high school kids marching to try to stop this landfill from going in this predominantly black, rural, poor county. It sparked a movement, and that's the time when, this is 1982, when Dr. Benjamin Chavis said, this is environmental racism. It sparked a movement, but it was heard beyond this one county. People got the message that this is happening in the South. It sparked the General Accounting Office from the Congressional Black Caucus to do a report that looked at hazardous waste facility siting in the South, 8 states in the South, Region 4, EPA Region 4. And what it found is that 75% of the hazardous waste facilities in that southern region were located in black communities, even though blacks only made up 22% of the population. You're 22% of the population, but you're getting 75% of the waste. Something's wrong with that. Something's wrong with that picture. 1987 is when the United Church of Christ and the Commission for Racial Justice, a faith-based organization based in the church, did this first national study, toxic waste and race in the United States. And what they found is that when they did their very sophisticated analysis, which still stands today, and when they did the multiple regression and they isolated the variables, it was not income, it was not property values, it was not land values, it was not education, it was race. Race was the most potent variable and had the most explanatory power in looking at why these landfills are located where they are. And in looking at this issue, a third of the facilities were located within a 2-mile radius made up by people of color. 1990 is when I said, I want to get a book out on this. And I want to expand my Houston study beyond Houston and look at the southern United States. You know, there's a reason why they call the South Dixie. It's more than a cup. Dixie is a mentality. And I said, I'm going to expand it beyond Houston to do Dallas. All the lead smelters in Dallas are located in black and brown communities, even though black and brown at that time were not no vast majority. It's a small population. I said, I went to Louisiana, Cancer Alley, and look at who lives closest to all these dangerous facilities. I found the largest hazardous waste facility in the country. It's located in the Alabama Black Belt in a county called Sumter, in a town called Emell, 95% black. I went all the way to West Virginia. And a lot of people say, oh, there are black people in West Virginia? Yeah. And Union Carbide found them. I mean, black folks have been there since the 1860s when West Virginia broke away from Virginia and said, we want to be a free state. We don't want to be a part of that, Civil War thing. And these companies came in there in the 1950s. Dumping in Dixie was the first book to document connection between waste dumping, pollution, and race. When I finished the book in 1989, I couldn't find a publisher. I got some nasty letters back from publishers. They're pretty good, high-quality publishers and well-known, but they blasted me. You would call young people say they really was trolling me. It's like, oh, why are you writing us about this environmental justice? The environment is equal everybody. Why are you writing me talking about environmental racism? How are you linking up this? And so I kept writing publishers, and just so happened I found a publisher in Boulder, Colorado. You ever been to Boulder? Boulder's different. Very different. I don't know what makes it different. It's probably mountain, high air, and tofu, bean sprouts, marijuana, but they published Dumping in Dixie in 1990. And it's a 160-page book. I wrote it to get in the hands of people fighting environmental racism and fighting environmental injustice, and they made the book 160 pages. They made the book a textbook, and the book was $30. And my people who out there fighting said, $30? We can't buy that book. And of course, I figured out a way to get the book to them. I won't do this because I know it's in webcams, but I found a way to do it. Author discount is really good, 40% to my people, because that's who I wrote it for. But I wasn't mad at Westview, because when I got the first royalty check, I looked at it and it had I thought it had some extra zeros on it, and I said, damn, I better go and deposit this check quick because it might be a mistake. I said, whoa, it wasn't a mistake. When a professor assigns a book as a textbook, students, what you got to do? Buy it. And I'm like, that wasn't up to me now. And then Westview had the nerve to want me to do a second edition. I added 2 more chapters, and the price of the book went down from $30 to $25. I said, damn, I really don't know nothing about capitalism. I'm like, well, how does this work? You add pages and chapters, and the book goes down. I said, suppose it's 500 pages, will it be $5? But anyway, the Dumping Dixie was 1990, but there's another historic event that occurred in 1990, is when a group of us in the academy started to get together and talk about these issues. And Bunyan Bryant and Paul Mulhey at the University of Michigan in School of Natural Resources were talking about pulling together a conference of academics and government officials and community organizations, et cetera, and having this conference on race and the incidence of environmental hazards. And we had that conference, and if you look at that, you can see that photograph. We're young then. This is 1990. Most of our hair is black, or most of us had hair, and it's like we had that conference at the University of Michigan, and we said, this is such a great conference, we need to follow up with letters to EPA and the Department of Energy and the President's Council on Environmental Quality and and the Department of Health and Human Services, and we wrote letters, and we heard back from the administrator of EPA, William Riley. This was during the first Daddy Bush administration. That's when they started to deal with environmental justice task force, set up an office of environmental equity. They didn't like justice. You know, they were scared of justice. We said, we have an environmental justice movement. We don't got no environmental equity movement. We ain't talking about, we don't want equity. We're not talking about equally spreading poison. That is not a movement for justice. That's insanity. So when 1991 is when we had a summit. We were still working with EPA at the summit, and we said, you know, there's an environmental movement out there, but somehow people of color are getting left out. We said, if we want to build a movement, we have to have a summit ourselves. And what the summit, 91 summit did was, it was an impetus from grassroots activism, research that we were being doing, how we had redefined the environment, and talking about coalition buildings, and there were conferences being held. First National People of Color Summit was planned by people of color for people of color. It was a 4-day summit, and the first 2 days was just people of color, African Americans, Native and Indigenous, Latinos, Asian and Pacific Islanders. We said people of color must come together and unpack the baggage that we have and the fact that we mistrust. We don't know that much about each other because of slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and all those other isms. We have to unpack that. And once we unpack that, and once we start building trust, then we have to open it up to everybody. So the second 2 days was everybody. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice, and we planned it for 500 people, and there was 1,000 people showed up, which was a good problem to have. And with 1,000 people, we said, we got to have a march, and we got to have a demonstration on the steps of the nation's capital. So we marched to the Capitol. We had our demonstration. We had our banners. This is a picture. I took that picture. I'm not in it, but I took it. I like to take a lot of pictures. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice. The first principle is that people must speak for themselves. They must have information that they can use that is user-friendly and that can empower them to make decisions. People must be in the room, and particularly the most impacted, must be in the room when decisions are being made. Those are it's 17 of those principles. Those principles are still valued today. 1991, when a group of us went to the Center for Disease Control, Agents for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, ATSDR, and said, well, we would like to have the CDC hold a conference on health and environmental health. And so they said yes. We were in the pressure applying business. We were not timid, we were not shy, and we were not somehow afraid to use our emerging power. And so they had the National Minority Health Conference in Atlanta that looked at environmental health and looking at communities that are most impacted. 1991. 1992 is when we got the EPA to finally do its report. Environmental equity, reducing risk for all communities. Again, EPA did not want to use justice. They said environmental equity. We said, we don't care what you call it. We know what we're working on. If you're working on environmental equity, and if you're talking about reducing risk, and we're talking about all communities, and especially those communities that are most impacted, we can go along with it. But when you look in the report, and you talk about those communities that are disproportionately and adversely impacted, those are environmental justice communities, not environmental equity communities. We want equity when it comes to how money is distributed, that money follows need. We want equity when it comes to make sure that enforcement is equitable and not, somehow look the other way just because somehow these communities are valued less. 1994 is when we got the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the premier research, biomedical research agency, to hold a conference, Health and Research Needs to Ensure Environmental Justice. Now, these are people who do studies on chemicals and all that kind of stuff. They had never done any environmental justice. the way that we got NIHS to do an environmental justice symposium is that we got the head of NIHS to take a tour in Louisiana's Cancer Alley and to come see. Don't watch the video. Don't wait in the mail for somebody to tell you something. Come and see for yourself with your own eyes the winding chemical plants along the river from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, so you can see for yourself how close these houses are, or these chemical plants are, to these communities, and to see the negative impact that that's having in terms of on health and environmental health. After he came back, he was a changed man. He said, no, we have to hold this symposium. And it was supposed to be 75 to 100 scientists. We said, no, we can't have just scientists talking about this. We need real communities, frontline communities to be. So we delayed the conference, and we planned it for a year, and we had over 1,000 people that attended this conference, and about 300 frontline communities who had scholarships to come because they couldn't make it to, D.C., Arlington, and spend 4 nights in a hotel. And if you've ever been to D.C., hotels are not cheap. Airline tickets to get from California to D.C. ain't cheap. So we said, no, you need to pay. We said, well, how are we going to? You're the government, right? Don't the government print money? So they made scholarships for our 300 grassroots folks. They said, we've never done that before. We are a science organization, yeah. And what's preventing communities to be healthy, their science. And there's a name for it. It's called political science. So we need some things addressed. So they agreed. And we had a great conference. And then the conference, the second day of the conference is when a few of us got a call from the White House during this conference saying, we want y'all to come over to witness something. Now, this was before cell phones. We'd get a call at the hotel, and they had to call you. Dr. Bullard, you're being paged, come to the lobby. Cell phone. And then they say, who is it? They say it's the White House. Yeah, joke. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. But it was real. It was real. And so a few of us got a call to witness the signing of the executive order. This is 1994 in February, of the executive order environmental justice, an executive order based on 2 laws, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. And we went to the ceremony. It was snowing, cold. We went to the Oval Office in the White House. And by the way, nice office. Bill Clinton signed an executive order, and Carol Browner is in blue. I'm next to Carol Browner, and that's Senator Wellstone, the late Senator Wellstone, who perished in an airplane. He was a senator from Minnesota. John Conyers, Al Gore is behind him. John Lewis, Carol Moseley Braun, who was a senator at the time from Illinois before Obama. And then Janet Reno is in the back, who was the Attorney General. It was a big time signing. We all got pens. We took a photo op. I still got the pictures. 1999, we said we need some smart people to do a study on environmental justice and document. We want the National Academy of Sciences. Smart people. Because when you have smart people saying it, people listen. So we got NIHS and EPA to raise the money to get the National Academy to do a study, Institute of Medicine, in 1999, and what the National Academy study found is that people of color and low-income communities are exposed to higher levels of pollution than the rest of the nation. These groups also contract certain diseases more than affluent white communities. We said, bingo! This is very revealing, smart people. Now, we had been saying it all along, but the messenger, and sometimes, is just important as the message. We needed a National Academy to validate what we have been saying all along. Now, we knew what they were going to find if they did the research and did the analysis and did the reviews, and et cetera. But to have the National Academy to come on board was very, very important. 2002 is when we had the second People of Color Summit. And what we said at this summit is that we will recognize the backbone of the environmental justice movement in this country, women and women of color who have always been on the front line, leading the charge, taking it to wherever it is, little old grandmothers, retired school teachers, family, home, community, tough as nails, take no prisoners kinds to do it. And they said no. And we honored them, and a lot of them, several of those women up there have won Goldman Prizes. The lady in Marjorie Shard in the red with the red hat. Beverly Wright over has won the Heinz Award. Peggy Shepard sitting right underneath Heinz Award. You name those. These women eventually were recognized at the highest level for their work. But we wanted to recognize them because we know what they do directly because we have worked directly with them. And so we said, you know, it was a beautiful ceremony. And I think the women decided to, we want to, I think the African American women, because hats is something in the black culture, say, we want the sisters to wear hats. You know what I'm saying? So it was a hat thing. So the black women got hats on. You know what I'm saying? And you're looking good. The lady sitting down with the brown hat, Miss Imelda West, 75 years old grandmother who fought Shintech and won. She went all the way to Tokyo and went to the CEO of the parent company of Shintech and put the cross on him. Very religious lady in Louisiana. In the name of Jesus, you will not locate in Convent, Louisiana. And you know anything about Louisiana, it's very religious, and then she sprinkled some dust on him. Now that's the old white tale, but Shintech did not locate in Convent, Louisiana, so it worked. So the thing is, these women have done work that has gone unsung and unrecognized, and we say it's time. If we look at justice, and we look at power plants, and we look at where facilities are located, and we look at studies that were beginning to document. So we have to document. But even when you document, you verify, it's still not enough. Having the facts has never been enough to undo racism. You can have the facts, you know, day and night, a mile long, and still get inaction. But we still have to do the work. Power plants disproportionately located where people of color are located. 2005, the Associated Press did a whole series on pollution and minority communities. It says blacks are 79% more likely than whites to live where industrial pollution poses the greatest threat. This is 19 states for blacks, 12 states for Hispanics, and 7 states for Asian. Those 19 states, 12 of those 19 states for black people is in the South. And I'll show you why. There's something unique about the South well, I'll show you. Better to show you than tell you. 2007 is when we did an update of the toxic waste and race study. 20 years later, what we found is that things had gotten worse because of where facilities were located. The percentage had changed. It's easy for whites at every income level to escape pollution than it is for black people at middle income. It's easier for low-income whites to escape pollution than it is for middle-income whites, blacks. What had changed over 20 years, 56% of people of color make up 56% of those persons living in neighborhoods within a 2-mile radius of a commercial hazardous waste facility. When you look at the clustering effect, 2 or more facilities, that number jumps to 69%. Almost 7 out of 10 residents who live within a 2-mile radius of a hazardous waste facility are people of color. People of color make up, in 2007, made up only about 37%, overrepresented in those neighborhoods where hazardous waste facilities are located. Here's a study that was done by sociologists out of Colorado. Found that it's not a poverty thing. Middle-income African Americans are more likely to live in polluted neighborhoods than poor whites. Black households with incomes between $50,000 and $60,000 live in neighborhoods that are more polluted than the average neighborhood in which white households with incomes below $10,000. You say, how can that be? Residential segregation, housing discrimination. There's a point where middle-income African Americans can't escape polluted neighborhoods because the barriers in housing and residential patterns and other kinds of barriers. And so when we talk about, you know, if you have enough money, money can buy you out of there. That's not true always. 2012, It's when the NAACP did a study called coal-blooded, coal as in coal, burning coal. And what it found is that over 2 million people living within a 3-mile radius of the top 12, or they call it the dirty dozen, coal-fired power plants. 76% of the residents who live around those dirty dozens are people of color. And when you talk about the problem, we talk about as we move away from coal to renewables and close these dirty coal-fired power plant, it provides enhancements and benefits in terms of climate, reducing greenhouse gases, but it also have co-benefits by reducing those coal pollutants that's causing lots of problems for the people who live nearby. And the dirtiest of the dirtiest coal plants, people of color, are the neighbors. And so we, in the environmental justice movement, are all in for moving away from coal and moving to renewables. Not just because of climate change, but because of health and other reasons. So when we talk about oil, where the oil refinery is located, there are 150 of them in the United States, in 32 states. They're not randomly distributed. But if you look at who lives near these coal plants, half of the people who live around these refineries are people of color. Here's a map that shows you where the power plants, the oil refineries are located. And look at the Gulf Coast, look at the blob from Texas all the way across Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. And if you look at these places, mostly where people of color are surrounding these places. In some cases, we work at those plants. In other cases, we across the fence. We could walk to work, but we don't get the jobs. We get polluted, we get sick, we get poverty. This is Houston. This is a refinery that's located across from an elementary school. No zoning. This is also Houston. This is Norco, Louisiana. This community, Norco, was founded by former slaves on the old diamond plantation. It's sandwiched between 2 refineries. Refinery on the left, refinery on the back, on the right. And Norco, or the old diamond plantation, where black folks bought land from the master after they were freed, and they stayed put. Shell came in the 50s. These black folks been there since the 1860s. So you say, who's in danger? Race, poverty, and chemical disasters. Where are the most dangerous chemical plants that could be where you have an explosion, and if there's an explosion, it's going to kill a lot of people? Well, gang, people of color, and poor people are most likely to be in the kill zone. Geography of vulnerability. This is the United States. There's a racial footprint placed on the U.S. that goes back all the way back. This is the United States right now, northeast, if you divide it up in regions, northeast, midwest, south, and west. And I'm in what state? Washington State, okay. This is an 1820 map. This is the Missouri Compromise. And at the time in 1820, Washington State was part of the Oregon country. If you look at red, or it might be pink, I was giving this talk and a millennial told me, he said, Dr. Bullard, that's not pink, that's salmon. I said, baby, in my Crayola box, we did not have salmon. We had pink and red. So you can call it salmon, or you can call it pink. But look at where the pink is, those southern states. And look at where the free states, green, and the place where, slavery was outlawed. And again, you'll see this. This is the 1860 map. Look at the red. The red is the slave states, the blue is the free, and you can see the Washington Territory is kind of like there. 1860. This is 1950 Jim Crow map where discrimination was codified in law. Pre-1954 Brown v. Board of Education. Look at the red. Look at the red states. Look at the blue. The blue is still the same. And look at Washington is blue now. So Washington State, there's no discrimination up here. But again, this is 1950, and so this racial footprint. Here's the U.S. Census black population distribution in 2010, where we're mostly located in the southeast, and we got a few black folks up in the northwest, and up in Maine and Vermont, 3 people on a good day. But again, you see the footprint. That footprint in 2010 looks like that footprint in 1820 and 1860. This is the Latino Hispanic population, South Florida, some of it in Northeast, Southwest, West. This is U.S. population, people of color in that purple, the southern tier half of the country, basically where you have the majority of people of color. Southern half. If you divide the country in half, you can see where that blue is, and you can pick out where most people of color are located. And there are pockets located in area. These are the projections. 2040, as a matter of fact, 2042 is a projection that people of color will make up the majority of the U.S. population. 2060, look at the states. Look at 2040, is that Washington State 2040 is blue, 40, 49%. It'd be different. Having a state 40, 49% would be different than it looks now, wouldn't you think? Well, and look at, in 2042, the whole country will be, 2060 is like, some white people will have lost their minds because that are losing their minds right now because these changing demographics is creating so much anxiety. And I live in a state right now where whites make up about 45% of the population, but some of them don't know it. They act like people of color are only 10%. And they gerrymander and they do all kinds of tricks to suppress. That's going to have to change if we are to progress and move forward. Here's a poverty belt. Look at the dark blue. You can draw a line across the half of the country. Bottom half of the country is where the poverty belt is. That's the same demographic. Look at the footprint of the racial gap belt. Zip code is still the best predictor of health and well-being. You tell me your zip code, I can tell you how healthy you are. Here's the economic inequality in terms of zip code. If you look at zip code, let me show you. These are the zip codes. And again, as you move toward blue, darker blue, that's more prosperous. As you start moving into salmon and brown and the darker brown, look at the bottom half. Look at the concentration of the brown. That footprint remains steady in terms of overlays. Where you live impacts how long you live and your quality of life. The lighter the area, the shorter the life expectancy. The darker the area, going brown, almost 84 years. You go down to the light shaded area, you're almost 10 years life expectancy. Now there's something going on. And again, inequality, disparity, the environment, the things that make you healthy and unhealthy, access. Here is every state ranked by healthiness, 2018. And as you move toward blue, most healthy. Look at Washington State, it's blue. Healthy people. Nobody's sick. Now we know there are pockets, there are disparities, but when you spread it out, it looks good. But if you disaggregate and go deeper, we know where the issues are. But look at the red. The red is the same as the 1820 map. The 10 healthiest states in the U.S., again, 2017 ranking, I didn't have time to put 2018 in, 1918. Look at the states. Washington State is 9. Massachusetts, Hawaii, Vermont, Utah, Connecticut, Minnesota, Colorado, New Hampshire. These are states that's got very few. Okay. Us. Their systems, their health system, delivery system, are much better in terms of, and then you look at the South. The dark blue, the bottom tier. The 10 unhealthiest states, 10 out of 10 are located in the South. Mississippi and Louisiana fight each year as to who's going to be on the bottom. Not who's going to be the best. They fight each other. So health, the best place to be a kid, or the worst place to be a kid. This is Annie Casey. The yellow, look at the yellow. The light yellow represents the worst place to be a kid in terms of delivery services for like asthma and nutrition and all the other things unhealthy. There's a geographic inequality mapping going on. Food hardship, this is food inequality by congressional district. Look at the salmon area, or the pink. Look where it's concentrated. Here's no car and no supermarket. Well, how in the hell, where you get your food? Local, next door, unhealthy, convenience store. You know what I'm saying? Overpriced. Look at where the brown is located. Going toward the dark brown is concentrated in those areas. Here's obesity. The most obese state, you go to red, you know. As you go toward green, it's better. As you go toward red and brown, it's worse. Mississippi, almost 34% of the folks in Mississippi are obese. Look at Colorado. Colorado is the skinniest state. I told you something wrong with Colorado. Mountain is green. Mountain air, tofu, bean sprouts, marijuana. I mean, it's like that's what's making them skinny. Here's a heart disease belt. The concentration of the red, the brown, look where the pattern. Here's the stroke belt. Look at the dark purple. Stroking out in the south. Look up in the northwest, you can see some pockets up there. Cancer belt, heavy brown. You can see the pattern. Here's uninsured belt. Dark green, look at that pattern going across the south. We are sick, we are poor, we don't have health insurance, but we don't want no Obamacare. Look at this is the uninsured belt. Here is Medicaid expansion. Look at the blue. The blue mean they have expanded Medicaid. They've participated in the American Care Act. Look at the would you say that's orange or brown? Or what it is, I say that's the, I was going to say it but won't, but that's the stupid belt. Looks just like, look, you're sick, you're poor, and you still don't want to, your people expanded. Texas has one of the highest concentration of uninsured, but yet still we don't want to expand Medicaid. Climate change, the people who have contributed least to climate, to the problem are getting hit first, worst, and longest. So we talk about vulnerability and we talk about responsibility. Preparing for these common disasters, these are major issues that we have to deal with. And that social vulnerability, those maps that I showed you, it's going to make it more difficult for those communities to become resilient when you don't have the means to make your community resilient. And if you are sick and don't have transportation, you're going to get left behind physically, socially, economically. And the fact that climate change is also a health issue. And it's taken some time to get folks who do climate work to talk about the health effects and the health impacts. And they're real in terms of air quality, in terms of mental stress, in terms of heat, in terms of respiratory, in terms of water issues, in terms of airborne and waterborne diseases, et cetera. And so when we talk about these issues, we have to be comprehensive. The most vulnerable places also have the most vulnerable people. We know who's going to be susceptible to extreme temperatures, outdoor air quality. People who work outside when it gets hot, some places it's going to be too hot to work. If it's too hot to work, you don't have an income, what's with that? Landscape architects, construction, and we know who disproportionately fill those jobs working outside. And talk about food-related infections, we talk about water-related infections, we talk about mosquitoes, we talk about Zika, we talk about wildfires, mental stress. And the most vulnerable regions in the country with those maps that I showed you. Most vulnerable. The National Climate Assessment Report said climate change creates new risks and exacerbate existing vulnerabilities in communities across the United States, presenting growing challenges to human health, safety, quality of life, and the rates of economic growth. So when we talk about severe weather events, the South has had more severe weather events by a ratio of 4 to 1 in the last 10 years. And if you look at the Southeast United States from the 80s to 2012, we've had more billion-dollar disasters than all other regions of the country combined. But yet still, if you look at, I don't think I put this in the climate denial, I had a map that shows you the map climate deniers. And again, it looks like the maps that we all said. Southern United States got governors and attorney generals that don't believe in climate change. Here's billion-dollar climate disasters, 1980 to 2012. The red of the area going to brown is most. Texas had the most. This is the 90s. If you look at on the one side, where lots of yellow, and as you move to darker yellow in the 90s, more. But as you look 2007 to 2016, you move from yellow to red to orange, which means that we've had more and more of these extreme billion-dollar events in the last decade. Climate change will exacerbate existing inequalities and worsen vulnerabilities of already marginalized populations. We talk about heat stress. We talk about urban heat islands. And again, there's a disproportionate impact of heat islands and heat stress on communities of color. And if you look at the racial composition of neighborhoods or areas where heat islands, where there are no trees, no vegetation, and you just have concrete and whatever, it's hotter, and people don't have money for air conditioning. So it means you're going to have more heat stress. Air quality, a big problem. We're going to have more bad air days. And the fact that, ground level ozone, unhealthy to go outside and run, walk, whatever, and work. Climate change will increase, as I said, the number of bad hair days and health threats, and people with asthma and respiratory illnesses are going to be hit hard. If we talk about asthma, right now, asthma hits people of color harder than the general population. African Americans are almost 3 times more likely than whites to die from asthma. Black children are 4 times more likely to be admitted to hospital for asthma as compared to non-Hispanic white children. African American children have an asthma death rate 10 times that of white children, non-Hispanic white children. So climate change is going to exacerbate all of that. Environmental disparities. America is segregated, and so is pollution. And so the pollution that's in the air is going to increase in terms of vulnerability population. It's going to create more and more vulnerabilities. If we talk about right now, air pollution kills over 200,000 people, early deaths each year. And this is a study that was done in 2017 at Harvard, said African Americans are nearly 3 times more likely to die from exposure to airborne pollutants than other Americans. In this case, we're talking particulate matter. I think I did that slide already. Okay, this is an EPA study. In 46 states, people of color live with more pollution than whites. And African Americans are exposed 1.54 times more, exposed to more fine particles than whites. And for Hispanics, it's 1.2 times. In other words, even the EPA study is showing that there are disparities that exist in terms of exposure to air pollution. And this is a map of that pollution. And the greatest disparity for the states, the 2 states, is Indiana and Alabama. Again, the maps. I don't know how this got more hurricanes and flooding. Some communities have the wrong for protection, protecting the most vulnerable. This is when we did the study in the book on New Orleans, we discovered that a lot of the vulnerability has nothing to do with the disaster itself. It's post-disaster, how funds are sent to recover. And if the funds don't go to need and ends up going where people have the political power, then the disparities and the inequality is exacerbated. Hurricane Katrina, I worked on a project. We got a project to do, look at in the wake of the storm. And again, 80% of New Orleans was flooded from the air. You see these pictures. Most of you were born in 2005, I think. Maybe? No? 13? Yeah. I mean, the people, had to float out waiting for, this is in the convention center. Looks like a third world country. But this is New Orleans in 2005. The convention center waiting. This is Harvey, 2017. I worked on 40 years. I've worked with communities having to evacuate. I had to evacuate myself. The most communities that were flooded, that hit hardest, communities that were inhabited largely with a high percentage of African Americans. It was not random, even though almost every community flooded. What's hit the hardest? People having to float out, walk out, gut their homes. In the convention center, George R. Brown. This is last week. I was in Austin at a water conference. I couldn't get back home because of what? Flooding. I mean, it started raining, and before it had a name, they say it's tropical depression. Next thing, it's got a name, and it just set, dump water. Tropical depression, Imelda. Flooding. Worst flooding since Harvey. Looking from the air. Airport shut down. People got 8 feet of water in their houses. People stuck on the freeway, can't get off. This is Interstate 10, just stuck. Had to be rescued, boated out. This is last week. I mean, more and more frequent flooding, storms, and climate change will hit poor people, and people are called hardest. This is a study that was done by UC Berkeley that found that if we do nothing in addressing climate change, by the end of the century, the U.S. will lose 6% drop in GDP. 6%. That's a 6. But if we do nothing, the same in a century, the South will lose 20% GDP. Now, the South already is the poorest, already the most climate threatened, also has the highest concentration of sick people, and you're going to lose 20% of your income or your GDP as a region. It means that the South should be leading the charge as opposed to being deniers. Here's a map of that. The area in terms of the darker the area, the higher the percentage of loss that will, in terms of GDP. You overlay that map and see those other maps in terms of social inequality. Climate change will widen the income and wealth gap. The South already has the widest gap, income, wealth gap. I'm not talking income, I'm talking wealth. Wealth is, is where you get your wealth. Wealth is in your housing and your businesses and your stocks and bonds, et cetera. And it will worsen that. 11 of the 20 states with the highest income inequality are in the South. And if you look at this map, the darker the brown, as you go toward brown, that's the highest inequality. As you move toward green, that's less inequality. So you can see the high brown and the same inequality. Climate change is going to worsen that inequality. And who's going to hit the hardest? The people that has contributed least. Disasters widen that wealth inequality. Climate change will widen the racial wealth gap. It's the race researchers at the University of Pittsburgh found that when they look at $10 billion weather events, natural disasters, not just weather, natural disasters, when they look at them and map them across the United States, on average, white communities gain, on average, $126,000 in wealth. So after the money recovery dollars go in, white communities come out, on average, $126,000 wealthier. But for those same disasters in those same areas, communities of color lose up to $29,000 on average. So you say, where is the disaster money going? It's going to the more wealthier parts of the region or the area. So disaster recovery will recover those folks who are more well off, and the people who are marginalized are further marginalized. The people who have less to lose and have lost the most will still be on the bottom, and that gap will widen. Right now, the black wealth gap is roughly black families make about 1/10 of what white families. It says 2016, the median wealth of black and Hispanic families was $17,600 and $20,700 respectively, compared to the median wealth of white families, $171,000. So the gap is going to widen. So what do? How do we create just and sustainable communities in the era of climate change? We have to come up with a climate action plan that address sustainability, equity, and racial justice. We have to talk about equitable development, talk about families below poverty, and address the widening health, income, and wealth gap. Addressing equity is a prerequisite to achieving climate resilience. This is an MIT Press book we did in 2003, right after the World Summit on Sustainable Development. We said we just can't have sustainability. We need just sustainability. Just sustainability is nothing but sustainability with justice. And so climate change really affects us all, but it has the greatest impact, negative impact, on those who are most vulnerable. And young people understand that. They are marching, they're striking, they're owning these issues and not allowing the wedge issues to drive us apart. Ultimately, I think we will move this agenda of climate, economic, racial justice, and economic justice agenda. And when we start looking at these issues in a holistic way and connect the dots, I think that's important that we provide that critique and that analysis and not just look at climate change as just greenhouse gases and parts per million, and not separate out economic justice from racial justice, climate justice, gender justice. And you start naming all those justice issues when we take care of children and we make sure that women, in terms of these movements and the vulnerability, we address all of that. We will go a long way in addressing these disparities and inequities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bullard. If people have questions, they can come up here and we can take a few minutes for questions for Dr. Bullard.
Hi, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you for giving the talk, and thank you for all the work that you have done that is behind what you told us about now. I just want to ask you that all of those gains with the EPA for environmental justice, but also for other environmental issues, was really hard fought for, and it took a long time to come. What do you think the impact has been on that situation with the current administration? And in what ways do you think it has affected black communities more than it has affected white communities and its consequences? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think the dismantling of environmental laws that have been fought, since the 70s and codified, I think it when you start dismantling Clean Air Act and Safe Drinking Water Act and waste laws, it affects everybody, but disproportionately those families and those households that can't afford to buy bottled water or can't afford to address some of the issues because of lack of income. We have, when you start basically reducing, allowing coal plants to emit more, of course it's going to impact those folks who live within that 30-mile impact area. When you start allowing certain types of permits to be granted or to be fast-tracked without having the proper hearings, it's gonna ripple through those communities that are most vulnerable. But ultimately, it's going to affect everybody because there's no Hispanic air, there's no black air, there's air, and most people don't decide I'm not going to breathe next Tuesday, and so it means that ultimately it will have negative impacts. That will ripple all the way up to the economic ladder. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. What can students like myself do to help out with the environmental justice movement, especially when we're living in a state, as we can see from all the maps, that is not directly affected by these issues necessarily as much as the South?
It's not affected just as much, but there are some pockets. I worked on a project in Seattle where we were trying to make sure that the environmental justice impacts of that Sound Transit light rail line did not disproportionately impact the population that's in the Rainier Valley, and we lost that case. And all the predictions that we had in terms of displacement, the negative impacts of businesses lost and people having to lose their homes, et cetera. And again, there's the widespread environmental injustice that exists in some states. You don't have it here, but there are areas where I think it's possible that you can work on. And the fact that climate change is one of those areas where there's always work that needs to be done across the board. And there are organizations that are working on these issues that you can volunteer, either here in the state or in other states. A lot of, after Katrina, a lot of students came down to Louisiana and volunteered. There are a lot of students volunteering in South Carolina with Florence and with Houston and Harvey, and in Puerto Rico with Marie. There's no shortage of work that needs to be done that we can use young people and their organizations. And in some cases, you can be right here and work on trying to get government officials to move fast and furious in dealing with laws and state, as well as trying to get federal laws strengthened to do some of this work: the economic, the transportation, the energy, clean energy, renewables. There's a lot that students can do, and students have made a difference. I was telling students this morning, I said, every social movement that has been successful in this country, peace and justice, civil rights, anti-war, environmental, they have had very strong youth and student components. And students have a lot of energy and lots of ideas, and I think you would be welcome in working with a lot of these groups that are out there. And some are youth and student dominated, and some are intergenerational that are working on a lot of things. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Dr. Bullard?
Good.
Well, great. Let's thank him one more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.